Hello there, AP World students. Let's learn all about Unit 6 Imperialism. This is kind of the big thing that was going on about 100 years ago in the late 1800s. So let's learn all about it. All right, here we go. Gotta get rid of that ad. All right, clicking the button. This always happens. All right, so what is imperialism? Well, industrialized societies after the year 1850 were so technologically better than countries in Africa and Asia, and to a degree Latin America, but they were already kind of quasi-controlled by the Western powers, that all these societies really couldn't fight back. The industrialized countries were just, they were so far in the future in technology that the societies that got left behind, they're going to get gobbled up. And the industrialized societies of the world, they're going to use their militaries to control these societies directly and incorporate giant areas of Africa and Asia into their growing empires. This is what imperialism is all about. So all these pictures are doing a great job showing you kind of the concept of imperialism, where these Europeans are just stealing parts of the world and claiming them as their own. Okay, and here's the thing. To justify this concept of we're taking over the world, a lot of Europeans had it in their head that it was a moral obligation to take over these parts of the world. That these people were having religions where there was human sacrifice, and that these people were being neglected from modern medicine and modern technology. You know, we have to bring them the light of electricity. And so that's what really the thought is. We're doing a good thing by taking over the world. We're spreading Christianity, medicine, technology. We're educating the ignorant, savage people of the world. So many Europeans strongly believed in this idea. But as I'm going to show you in this lesson today, the legacy of imperialism would not be internationally remembered as a positive thing. And the reality was, these European countries had big guns, they had advanced guns, and African and Asian countries lacked the military capability to resist. And I'll show you plenty of examples of cultures that fought back against imperialism and just failed. Because if the other side has guns and you don't have guns, it's not a fair fight. And so many of Africa and Asia's resources would be forcibly taken from their lands and sent off to improve the industrial economies of the Western world. Okay, let's check it out. So here's another very important concept. I think there's like 4 questions on your guys' next test that all relate to this concept, so learn it well. Social Darwinism. Charles Darwin was a British scientist who lived during this time, and he came up with the theory of evolution. He studied a bunch of birds and other animals, especially in the Galapagos Islands in South America, and he observed that different animals have different features. And his theory says that over thousands and thousands of years, the animals with the best features will dominate the ecosystem, and the animals with the weaker features will die out, so the strongest, the fittest will survive, and they will dominate the weak. Well, Charles Darwin said that that is all about animals living in nature, but many European political scientists took that concept and applied it to societies in general. That specific countries, specific ethnic groups will end up surviving, and those ethnic groups are to dominate weaker ethnic groups. So they use this policy to justify some incredible racist things that are going to happen during this time period. But this social Darwinism is especially something you'll see in the British Empire, the Japanese Empire, and Nazi Germany. So whenever you see social Darwinism, be like, uh-oh, racism, because that's where it's coming in. And I want to highlight both of these pictures right here and explain why they show social Darwinism. So in this first picture here, you can see that this European white dude is like 6 times as large as all these people in India. So it shows that there's kind of this supremacy, this importance placed on this European man. And then this picture right here, the African people in the picture, they're clearly kind of dancing around, not very organized. And these white men are walking through in proper clothes, and they've got this proper posture, which sort of gives you the impression that they are more civilized than the Africans in the picture. So this is definitely the concept of social Darwinism. And it's obviously not true. Social Darwinism has been totally debunked in our modern world today, but it was the thinking 150 years ago or so. Okay, so let's first of all, this Prezi is going to be about Africa today. So Europeans realized that they now had the technological and medical capabilities to take over the continent of Africa. Africa has been right next to Europe during all of world history, but for all of world history, Europeans never really got that far into Africa. Okay, they did the trading for slaves, but Europeans would stay on the ships and they would have agents in Africa kind of resolve the slave trade on their behalf. Because every time when Europeans would try to walk in Africa, especially around the jungles in Central Africa, they would get bit by mosquitoes, and it's like a 50-50 chance that if a European is bit by a mosquito back then, they'd get yellow fever and the European would die. So Africa was just sort of off limits because there are all these diseases that Europeans had no immunity to. But the new vaccine technology that just came out during the Industrial Revolution at this time made it so that Europeans could be far more resistant to yellow fever, to malaria, to dengue fever, and so they could wander through Africa and actually have a physical presence there. Europeans, they recognized that they now had the ability to take over the country. So in the beginning, there was a lot of competition over these various European factions saying like, well, Great Britain's going to take it all. No, France will. Well, we'll go to war with you. And so this guy, Otto von Bismarck, the leader of Germany, he decided to host an event called the Berlin Conference. I think it was in 1884. And he brought in representatives from every major European country. He drew a map of Africa in the middle of this big table, and he said, all right, everybody, make your claims. Let's talk it out right now. Who's going to get what parts of Africa? The interesting thing about this conference was no Africans attended. This was just white people 3,000 miles away making all the political decisions that would affect who controls which parts of the continent. And the other real sad thing is that at the Berlin Conference, they had no understanding of where the various tribal groups were, where the religious groups were in Africa. They just sort of drew their own lines on the map. And this is ultimately the map of Africa they came up with. And to a large degree, a lot of the decisions they made at the Berlin Conference are still the modern-day borders of many African countries to this day. So if you ever wonder why is Africa kind of a political mess in the modern world, it's because Europeans decided the borders of Africa and gave no respect to the various ethnic and language and religious groups. So it's pretty terrible stuff. And another interesting fact, too, that I'll just add in at the side of this slide is that Africa was the last explored continent in the entire world. We had a full detailed map of Antarctica before we had a map of Africa. And it's largely because, especially the central part of Africa, the Congo, it's just incredibly difficult terrain and difficult jungles, and there's crazy mountains and crazy rapids, rivers everywhere. So Europeans had a real tough time figuring out that part of the world. And I mean, still to this day, if you want to hide from the international community, go to the Congo. No one will find you. All right, moving on. So, actually, one more thing I got to say. The machine gun. This is going to be a huge deal, and I think I bring this up in the next slide as well. But let's just see. So the Berlin Conference continued. Okay, so the big winners at the Berlin Conference were Italy, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, and Britain and France. They were the ones who claimed almost all the continent of Africa, and all of these are somewhat industrial countries with the exception of Portugal and Belgium. They somehow weaseled their way in there. See, I already said all this. So they drew lines on a map to determine Africa's future, paid no attention to the cultural linguistic differences, Still lasting ramifications from this day. Ah, see, I already said all this. I'm so smart about myself. But, I think this picture is so telling. Africa is this dugout hole, and all the resources of Africa are just piled on top of Europe. This is what imperialism is about, kids. It's just, we've got the technology, we've got the power, we're going to take whatever we want. And then here's Europeans in a steamboat coming up against some African tribal warriors, and these guys clearly don't want them there, but, I mean, the Europeans got machine guns. What are you going to do? Okay, so I'll just move on. I've already explained all this from the previous slide. Okay, so now let's deep dive into what happened in the Congo. The central part of Africa was given to the country of Belgium, and Belgium at the time had this king named Leopold II, and his whole vibe was, I want to educate the savage Africans, I want to convert them to Christianity, I want to teach them French, and I want, to spread the good qualities of the European people to the ignorant people of Africa. So for King Leopold's entire life, he was given high fives by people. He was doing these interviews saying that he's such a giving, wonderful, charitable man. And the people of Europe truly believed he was doing good work in his control of the central part of Africa. Let's make a little prediction right now, kids. What do you think was really happening there? Because the Congo Free State goes down in history as one of the worst human disasters in world history. Let's check it out. The reason why Leopold was so especially interested in the Congo was at this point in history, the Congo was one of the few places in the world that contained wild rubber. We had not yet, at this point in history, figured out how to turn oil into rubber. We do that later, I think, like the 1950s. But so the Congo was just full of wild rubber trees. And the way you get rubber from trees, I think I'll show you on the next slide as well, is you have to tap rubber trees. You have to kind of carve these intricate loops around the tree, and over time the tree's sap will accumulate in a bowl at the bottom, and that sap can be easily refined into rubber. And you need rubber for a lot of things in the industrial era. You need it for tires, you need it for electrical wires. That's a huge thing. You need it for shoes. All kinds of people are buying new shoes. So the Congo's rubber would make Leopold in Belgium very, very rich. They're going to get tons of money out of the rubber system here. Okay, here's some pictures about how to tap wild rubber trees. So there they are, carving little circles around the rubber trees right there. Carving them up, tapping rubber. But this is the big lie here, okay? Leopold had a private army called the Force Publique. And the Force Publique was a pretty interesting organization because there was only about 1,000 white officers. So there was only like a very small number of actual Belgians in charge of it. And what they did was they employed 50,000 African soldiers. And these African soldiers were from other parts of Africa. You know, they spoke different languages than the people in the Congo. They had different religion. I think most of them came from the Muslim parts of northern Africa. So they had no connection or correlation to the Congolese. Well, the Force Publique led their army all over the Congo and more or less reinstituted slavery in the entirety of the Congo. And by that, this is what they said. They said every single adult male in the Congo has to provide the Force Publique with, I'm just going to say, 10 pounds of wild rubber every month. If you do not give us our rubber quota for this month, we will find a child living in your community, preferably one of your own children. But if you don't have children, we're going to just take a random kid and we're going to cut off their hand. It's pretty brutal stuff, okay? So not only were they known for chopping off kids' hands, but they would also use all kinds of terrible torture techniques to force anybody in the Congo who didn't harvest rubber to harvest rubber or receive a terrible punishment. So the amount of terror that was instituted in the Congo was was of a pretty unbelievable scale. And it's also an interesting fact how it was this white officer corps with African soldiers that did the dirty work for King Leopold. An interesting fact too, Leopold never went to Africa his entire life. He only ever, heard about rubber and heard about ways to make people work for him, and he just checked all the boxes and said, get to work, boys. I'm going to stay here in Belgium. All right, let's check it out. Currency of human hands. Here's some actual pictures that were taken of some of the victims of the Force Publique. And by a lot of accounts, 10,000 children had their hands cut off. So it's just like, Jesus Christ. Huge, huge numbers of maimed people. And here's the sad truth, kids. King Leopold lived a long, full life. He got rich off of all this money he was taking out of Africa. Did it for 40 years. He died in his bed when he was 65 with a 16-year-old girl, mind you. Tells us something about his lifestyle choices. Anyway, Belgium earned $2.5 billion in profit, and this is $2.5 billion in $1,900. So we're talking maybe trillions of dollars today. And 10 million Congolese died during the Belgian occupation trying to resist the Force Publique. And a lot of those 10 million people who died, it was because they had to spend their entire day farming rubber or harvesting rubber, so they couldn't have time to grow food for themselves. So there were stories of mass starvation. And also, once people keep getting their hands cut off, they can't really be utilized to support a population in the jungle. So this is just a point I want to bring up. So here's the historical scorecard, okay? Hitler killed 6 million Jews, and he's remembered as one of the worst guys ever, okay? And he's a terrible person in world history. But Leopold II killed 10 million Congolese, and he got away with it. Another fact, too, is we can talk about how terrible the slave trade was. And no doubt, the slave trade was so bad. But in total, 20 million people were taken from Africa and sent to the New World as slaves. And that occurred over a 300-year period. King Leopold did half that damage in 30 or 40 years. Like, the scale is so big. And Leopold largely isn't talked about in many international circles. And I think it's because there's no lesson to learn from him. The lesson is the bad guys win. And it sucks. It sucks, kids. This is history. Leopold's on Belgium's money. He's remembered as the Builder King. And look, I've deep dived now into the story of what happened in the Congo, but very similar stories happened in almost every part of Africa during this period. The European countries came in, they used their superior militaries, they forced the people to work, and the resources were just harvested out of Africa, and all the profits stayed in Europe. And I'm actually prepared to argue that to a degree, this process even continues to this day. To this day, Africa is a place where a lot of hard resources come out, a lot of primary resources, and those resources are distributed to the Western world, and the Western world processes them, converts them into higher level materials. The Western world sells them, and the Western world keeps the vast majority of the money. That's what's up. No, nothing good to say. Okay, now let's talk about some failed resistances to imperialism. I probably should have purpled some of these words. This is my mistake. Okay, so Tupac Amaru, he led the Incan people, so now I'm jumping back to South America for a second, in a failed rebellion in Peru against the Spanish. Samori Touré, he led some West Africans in a failed rebellion against France. Ya Asanta, she was the queen of the Ashanti Empire in modern-day Ghana. She led a failed rebellion against the British. If only they still had Nzinga of Matamba. I know, I wish she was still around too. But the thing is, look, I could deep dive into all three of their stories, but I'm going to just summarize it right now. They said, hey, Europeans, stop messing with us. stop stealing our stuff, stop treating us poorly. The Europeans said no. They said, okay, we're going to fight you. Well, it was these militaries of African native Peruvians. They had bows and arrows, they had spears, they had wicker shields, and they went up against European armies with rifles, machine guns, and heavy artillery. Who do you think's gonna win, kids? It was a battle of technology, and in every single case, it was so unfair. There was no chance. And the statistical realities of so many of these wars and so many of these battles, it's just depressing. It's like 50,000 Africans are killed and 25 Europeans are killed. And then when the Europeans come home, they're like, we won because of our bravery. We won because of our commitment to the king and crown and country and nationalism. Roar. No, the reason why you won is because you had guns. Like that's it. That's the reality. That's the legacy here. Okay, moving on. So here's this is exactly what I'm talking about. The Sokoto Caliphate, also here, this one probably should have been even the last slide. The Sokoto Caliphate in modern day Nigeria, they fought against the British. They lost terribly. The Mahadist Wars in Sudan, once again, fighting against the British. And here, I've got the statistics right here so you can see it. The notable battle in the Mahadist Wars was the Battle of Omdurman, one of the first uses of machine guns in world history. 52,000 Sudanese warriors versus 8,000 British. The Sudanese outnumbered them almost 6-1. And in the end of that battle, 400 British casualties. And by casualties, I think the vast majority of those guys were wounded. I think they only lost like 10 guys in the battle. But the Sudanese, they had 30,000 casualties. And I think most of those Sudanese ended up dead. And it's just, the scale of military violence is now just ratcheting up in world history. And this military technology is going to define all warfare for the future of human history. Because in the past, yes, even 300 years ago, Europeans had guns and other people around the world didn't have guns. But the difference is the Industrial Revolution has made guns so much more effective. Okay? A machine gun, you're just throwing bullets everywhere. Rifles, bullets are unbelievably more accurate than they were in the past. So it's no longer a reasonable fight to use a sword against a gun anymore. And it never will be for the rest of human history. Okay, let's talk about cultural suicide. This is a interesting concept, and this will be over 2 slides. So the Xhosa cattle killing movement in South Africa, it was led by a female prophet named, I'm not even going to try, I'll got to try with that name, Nonkwasu. Anyway, she had this religious experience, and she claimed that if the Xhosa people, which was most of the native people in South Africa, if they killed their cattle and destroyed their crops, the white man would be swept away into the sea, and the gods would provide them with food. Well, plenty of people tended to believe her, so her tribe killed 500,000 cows. And at the end of the day, none of these prophecies came true. Okay, they killed all their cows, and they're like, okay, the white men are still here. Okay, when's the food going to rain down from the sky? And cows were the primary source of not only food, but of also their industry. They were all kind of herdsmen down in South Africa at this time. So 75% of the Xhosa people would die from starvation. Pretty terrible. I don't think Nongase intended that. I think she authentically did believe in what the gods told her, but didn't work out. It was really just cultural suicide. Actually, here's not cultural suicide though. So the Zulus, and I'll comment on the Zulus. So I did already just go on a little rant about how if you don't have guns, you can't win. But there is one exception to that, okay? The most effective native resistance in southern Africa was by the Zulu tribe. They were kind of on the other side of the Xhosas. And they were led by a dude named Shaka. And Shaka successfully destroyed some British armies during the Zulu Wars. And actually, wait, was Shaka alive during the Zulu Wars? Don't quote me on that. But Shaka is largely seen as their leader. And yeah, the Zulu Wars, very effective resistance until Shaka was killed by his brother. So, mistake. And the Zulus are a rare example of successfully resisting imperialism for a time, but the British will eventually roll over the Zulus as soon as they bring in more soldiers and more machine guns and more rifles. Why was Shaka so effective? Well, he realized that the reason why guns were so good was because they have a range over people with spears. So Shaka really tried to ambush the British whenever he could and use kind of guerrilla warfare style tactics. So those were what really saved him in the end. Okay, let's talk about some successful resistance to imperialism. This is coming up. Menelik II, my man. Is there any Ethiopians in the house? Gotta give some respect to Ethiopia. So Menelik, he recognized the realities of war and was like, okay, I need to get my dudes guns. And something kind of cool is Ethiopia has been a Christian country for thousands of years, definitely kind of the Christian holdout in Africa for so much of world history. So with their Christian connections, they called up Russia and said, hey, Russia, can you send us some guns and machine guns and cannons? And Russia's like, no doubt. So Menelik II armed up his guys with guns, and as soon as the Italians came in there and were like, hey, we're Italy, we're going to imperialize your country, Menelik's like, about that, no. So he fought back, and they won. And this is maybe the only example of a successful resistance to the imperialism in Africa. And it's because Menelik got his boys some rifles. Okay? But yes, the majority of imperial powers, of resistance against imperial powers, failed because they did not have technology. Menelik solved that problem. So high five to my Ethiopian boy right there. Get it. All right, and we'll talk about this in the next slide. So peace out. Or next video.